Hey, what's up everyone? Welcome back to Babylon Talmud. Today we're studying Daf 66, Daf Samach Vav, Masechta Yoma. Daf Samach Vav, it kind of like, well, remember like how yesterday we kind of stopped like right in the middle, kaze? So we're going to pick up from there. I guess every day we pick up from where we left off. Yeah, I guess every day we pick up from where we left off, but I guess this time we kind of stopped right in the middle because there was kind of only really the choice to stop right in the middle. So where we stopped, we were in the middle of a machlokas, well, trying to understand the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda, because you see, Rabbi Yehuda says that when it comes to shkolim, when it comes to the machzis hashekel donations, in the event that whatever it was, it worked out that they had to make the donation twice. So Rabbi Yehuda's opinion is that the extra donation that they gave can count for the next year. And Rav explained it's because the chovas, the obligations of 1 year, can carry over to the next. Now the thing, and that was Rabbi Yehuda's opinion. So the thing is that Rabbi Yehuda's opinion is also that when it comes to the offerings of Yom Kippur, if you set aside a cow or a goat and it got lost, so then you took a different one and offered that, and then you found the original. So the original one, he says you have to kill it, lemaise, right? You just let it die. So the shaila is, but I thought Rabbi Yehuda's opinion is that you're allowed to use the obligations from 1 year to the next. So that's what we're trying to solve, right? It's inconsistent. On the one hand, Rabbi Yehuda's opinion seems to be that you can use the donation, the things from 1 year to the next. Yet when it comes to Yom Kippur, he seems to be saying that you can't use the animals set aside that got lost and then found. It says you have to kill them. So we're gonna start off trying to answer that question, as we had a few suggestions yesterday. We're gonna give a few more today, and then we move on in the service of the Kohen Gadol on Yom Kippur, moving on to the chucking the goat off the cliff, which we've been discussing and referencing a number of times recently with the Sar La'azazel. Chaver, let's begin. Got it? It's 2, 4, 6 lines from the bottom of Samachim with Beis. So the shaila is that we're concerned that if you keep the animal, right? Let's just say the goat for now. So if you keep the goat for an extra year, right? So you set aside a goat to be for the Sar on Yom Kippur, and then it gets lost, so you set aside a different one instead, and you offer the new one, and then you find the original goat. So we're concerned that if you leave it for next year's Yom Kippur, well then it might be a chatas sha'avar shnasa, right? A korban chatas has to be a goat within its first year. Now if you leave this goat that got lost and then found for next year, then it might be over a year old, in which case it would be unusable. Frek the Gemara, Gezerah. What do you mean Gezerah? We're concerned that maybe it'll be over a year old next year. Hi gufa chatashav shnasahi. By definition, if you wait till next Yom Kippur, it's going to be a year older, which means by definition it's going to be over 1 year old. Halo kasha. The Gemara says, not necessarily. Ki Rebbe. This is like the opinion of Rebbe. The Tanya, as we learn in the Brisa, Shana Tmima Mone Shalosh Meus V'Shishim Achmisha Yom K'minyan Mosachama Divrei Rebbe. Rebbe's opinion is when it comes to Batei Arei Choma, houses in a walled city. Now the halacha is, if I'm not mistaken, if I'm getting all my details right, the halacha is that if a fellow purchases a house, right, meaning in general, every 50 years, so everything goes back to the original owners. However, if we're talking about a house in a walled city, so then there is 1 year for the owner, the person who sold it, to reclaim it. After that year, it's non-reclaimable. So the question is, how do you count 1 year? Rebbe's opinion is that 1 year is 365 days. Whereas the Chacham's opinion is that no, you just count 12 months. Meaning, like a year in terms of months. Nisaba. And if it was a leap year, so then Beseder, and it's a leap year. Meaning, if it's the, I don't know, Chveisnish, where are we? We're right now in Tammuz. So, if a certain day in Tammuz of this year, so you wait till that day in Tammuz. So if the sale happens on Chveisnish, the 5th day of Tammuz of this year, so you wait till the 5th day of Tammuz of the next year. And if it's a leap year, so the seller has an additional year to buy it back. Okay? An additional month to buy it back. So we see that according to Rebbe, a year is defined by 365 days. And therefore, in terms of Chatas Sha'ava Shnasa, so it only becomes more than a year old that's unusable for Korban Chatas if it's more than 365 days. Yet, when it comes to Yom Kippur is the 10th day of Tishrei the following year, which if it's a regular 12-month year, lunar year, 354 days, which means that if the goat that you're using was 8 days old, because it can't be less than 8 days old, but if the goat that you're using is mamish 8 days old, and you wait to Yom Kippur of next year, which is 354 plus another 8 is 362, so Lemaisa, you have a few days over there that you could theoretically use the goat the following year, and it would still be within 365 days since it's born, so it would still be usable as a korban chatos. And so therefore we're concerned that, but if you save it for next year, it might be a goat that's a little bit older than 8 days old, in which case it would be more than 365 days old. And then out of concern that the goat the following year might be over a year old, we say that you cannot, you can't keep it for next year. Rather, kill it. Well, that is all fine and well for the goat, because the goat is a 1-year-old goat. But the cow, we're talking about a 3-year-old cow, and therefore it's not going to be an issue of Chatas Shava Shnasa. It doesn't have a 1-year obligation. It's a 3-year obligation. So, it's a cow that's 3 years old. So, Gezerah Par Atu Sawyer. So the Gemara says, well, we make a Gezerah by the cow out of concern for the goat. Since the goat we have to be concerned about, so Memela, we say the cow also, kill it, don't leave it for the next year. But what, just because we're concerned of mixing it up with the goat, now you have to kill the cow? It's not very nice. I mean, some people don't mind killing things for, without good reason, but the Gemara disagrees and says we shouldn't just kill things without having a good reason for it. So, ve'od chatas shava shnasa l're'iyah azla. And similarly, and more so, a chatas that is more than a year old, you don't kill it, you let it graze. The Amar Rish Lakish, it's a Gemara Riyad Taka in Masechta Psachim, that says Rish Lakish, chatas shava shnasa, that if you have a korban chatas that's more than a year old, so we see, we view it as though it's in a cemetery, a place where a Kohen isn't able to go, and you just let it graze. Meaning, so if you have a chatas that's more than a year old, you basically just let it be, let it graze. If it gets a mum, you sell it, and zeu. But, so, mimonavshach, even if it is a chatas shava shnasa, you wouldn't, the halacha wouldn't be to kill it anyways. So, Ella. Rather, says Rava, that we're concerned that if you leave around this animal for a year, you might end up using it. And the Gemara is going to explain what exactly we're concerned about, what exactly you might make a mistake with about it. But Rava says that, look, you had initially set aside this animal to be for Yom Kippur. Ikad lost, so you set aside a different animal and used it. You now found the original one. If we say keep it for next Yom Kippur, well, over the course of the year, you might end up doing something with it that you're not supposed to do, and the Gemara hasn't yet explained what that is. The Tanya, in Makdishin ve'in Marichin ve'in Machrimin bizman hazeh, that we're not, and meaning to show, to prove that we're concerned about takalas, so that we bring a brisa that says that we are not makdish things nowadays. We don't say that the value of that you're going to send the value of something to the Beis Hamikdash, or making a cherem. I don't really know what a cherem is, but also some kind of setting aside of epis. So, these different kinds of things, now these would normally be set aside for the Beis HaMikdash. So we don't do it nowadays, because Lamaisa, as Janine pointed out the other day, well, she was referring to the Aron, that there was no Aron in the second temple, but Lamaisa, now we don't even have a temple, B'chlal. So, Vim Hikdish V'herich V'hechrim, and what if a fellow did? What if a fellow is makdish an animal, or said a certain value is I'm going to bring a certain value to the Beis Hamikdash, or hechrim, or he made epis cherim. So behema teyakar. So if we're talking about an animal, so teyakar, the Gemara is going to explain what teyakar is. Peres ksus v'chilim yerakvu. If we're talking about fruits, I don't know, clothing and vessels, they should rot. I understand fruit rotting, but what about clothing and vessels? I don't know. Maybe it's a raya that they had, what's it called, eco-friendly kalim back then, that they can decompose and rot. Well, mistama that eco-friendly things anyways back then, I assume. But maybe not. We probably were always not so eco-friendly. But it was pre-industrial revolution, so it was probably on a much lower scale. And if we're talking about money or other kinds of metals, so then throw them into the Dead Sea. Okay, so don't set aside these things nowadays. Bezu ikr. Okay, we said if it's an animal, so then teyakar. What's ikr? Noel delis lefanel v'imesa me'elel. So you just put it in a room, and you lock the door, and see what happens after a while when you don't feed it. Or maybe let somebody else see what happens. Takala demai. Now the Gemara wants to know, what exactly are we concerned about? Right? Meaning we're saying, nowadays we don't want you to be machrim anything, like to set aside anything, because that goes to the Beis HaMikdash. There's no Beis HaMikdash, so you can't do anything about it. And also, we're saying that we're concerned we don't want to leave around an animal from this year for next year's Yom Kippur, because something bad might happen. What bad thing might happen? So itakala da'akrava. Well, if we're concerned that you might end up offering it as a different korban, it's just lying around, you might end up using it. Safilu kori'os nami. Well, then shouldn't we be concerned that every time the halacha is that you have an animal that needs to graze, shouldn't we be concerned, well, what if you end up using it as a korban? And yet we don't say that in every other case. Itakala degiz v'avoda. And if we're concerned that you might end up shearing its wool, or you might end up working it, although, you're probably not going to really shear a goat or a cow, but I guess the point is you might use it in a way that would be like me'ila or whatever. Afilu koriyos nami. So also in general, ki'ilu, if there is, if we're concerned that you might kind of like work the animal in a way that's not allowed because it's hektish, so then we should say that about every time an animal needs to graze. Well, what if you're going to end up working it? So the olam takala da'akrava. So the Gemara answers, really, we are talking about the concern that you might end up offering it as a different korban. Okay, so then why are we only concerned about this animal from Yom Kippur to Yom Kippur and not like by every animal that needs to graze? Well, because an animal that just is going out to graze until it gets a mum, so you're not really thinking about it so much. It's like, oh, that animal, I got nothing to do with it. I just gotta let it graze till it gets a mum. You're not really, it's just not even top of your mind. But whereas when it comes to this animal that you had initially set aside for Yom Kippur, and then it got lost, and you offered a different one, and now you found this, and now you're waiting for the entire next Yom Kippur, so it's on your mind, you're thinking about it, it's around, you're keeping an eye on it, and you might end up, I guess, inadvertently offering it as a korban. V'takola atzma tanoi. Now the Gemara says, wait, and actually this concern about you might end up making a mistake and offering it as a korban is actually a machlokas tanoim. The Tanya is learning a brisa. The Tanya chad, that one brisa says Pesach shlo kariv barishin yikariv b'sheni. If you have a korban, an animal that you set aside as a korban Pesach, and it was not offered as a korban Pesach, so it can be offered as a Pesach sheni. B'sheni yikariv l'shana abaya, and if it was not offered as Pesach sheni, so you can offer it next year. And mistama, it would also have to be like Rebbe that that a year is defined here by 365 days. Mitani idach, we have another brayso that says, Lo yikarev, you can't offer it later. My lab, takolo plige. Let's say that the machlokas is about takala. That the Tanakama, the first brayso that says that you're allowed to use a Pesach Rishon as a Pesach Sheni or even next year, that you can hold on to it for a longer period of time. We're not concerned that something is going to go wrong during that period of time. Whereas the second brayso that says, no, you cannot offer it as a different later on korban, we'll say that the author of that brayso is concerned about a takala. So lo. No. No, I'll say that nobody's concerned that something's going to go wrong. Let's just say that the machlokas here has nothing to do with takala, it just has to do with machlokas between Rebbe and the Rabbanon. V'lo kasha, Rebbe or Rabban. And the brayso that says that you can use this animal for next year's Korban Pesach holds like Rebbe, who says that you can use it for 365 days, and as long as it's within 365 days, you can use it. Whereas the brayso that says you cannot use it for next year's Pesach is because he holds like the rabbis, that Memele next year is already going to be a year later. But 1 second, the brayso says that the same thing would apply to money. And money has nothing to do with like whether it's a year old or not. So no, rather, so it must be, if you set aside money for your Korban Pesach, so it's the same machlokas about can you use it for next year or not, because the question is, what if you end up using the money for something else over the course of the year? And the Tanakama says we're not concerned about takala, and the first brayso says we're not concerned, the second brayso says we are concerned about takala. Givaldik. Okay, so now the Maise, we get to a new Mishnah about the Sayir HaMishtalech. Uvalo Eitzel Sayir HaMishtalech. Now the Kohen Gadol goes to the Sayir HaMishtalech, the goat that will be dropped off the cliff. And he puts his two hands on the Sayir HaMishtalech, Misvade, and he confesses. This is what he would say. Ana Hashem, Chatu Avu Pashu Lefanecha Amcha Beis Yisrael. He says, please God. I might say I have a friend, Yitzchak Meir Malik. I think he has an album called Please God. So he says, please God, that the Yidden Lemaise have sinned. Ona Hashem, please God, please atone for the sins that the Yidden sinned. As it says in the Torah, because on this day the Eibishter will atone you, the Tire Eschem, to purify you, from all of your sins, before the Eibishter you will become pure. And the priests and the nation that were standing in the Azara, when they would hear the God's name, that came out of the mouth of the Kohen Gadol, they would bow on the ground and fall to their faces, and say, that blessed is the honorable name of God's kingdom forever. Then the Kohen Gadol would give the goat to the fellow that would escort the goat to the cliff, and then give it a shtickle nudge. And this escorter can be anybody. But rather the Kohanim kind of established it that it would always be a Kohen, and they wouldn't allow a regular old Yisrael to escort it. So I would not be the escort. Okay. Alright. I never really thought about if I would want to. I mean, I guess I'd want to. Why not, right? I guess it's fun. Otherwise, I guess I'd just be in shul. Walking a goat, I guess, sounds pretty fun. But then you got to push it off the cliff. Alright, Lamaisa, what do you want me to tell you? It's Yom Kippur. Oh, wow, that's an interesting job, Lamaisa. Alright, let's go weiter. So, Amr Reb Yossi says, Reb Yossi, Maisa Volicho, Arsla, V'Yisrael Haya. So there was a story that this fellow Arsla, he was in charge of escorting the goat, and he was a Yisrael. V'chevesh asulo, and they had to make him a special ramp. B'pnei Bavliim, because of the Babylonians, metalshim b'sayro v'omim lo tovetzei, that they were chopping his hair, and they would say, "No, weiter, go already. You got all of our sins with you. Just get out of here. Drop him off a cliff already." And they'd give him a hard time. Maybe it was like I don't know what the word is called, antithetical, whatever it is, but I guess they wanted him, I guess maybe they were like pushing him, and maybe they're like pulling him by his hair and saying, "No, Arsla, get out of here already. We just want you to chuck our sins off the cliff already." Okay? So they had to protect him with a special ramp. Interesting. If you look closely at the words that the Kohen Gadol says in his confession, he doesn't say anything about the sons of Aharon, implying that the sons of Aharon were not included in this Sarah Mishtaleach. Mantana. So who would be the Tana who says that? Or Rabbi Yirmiyah delok Rabbi Yehuda. So Rabbi Yirmiyah says it's not Rabbi Yehuda, because we saw Machlokas and Daf Samach Aleph Mud Aleph, stomach 5 days ago, Machlokas between Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Shimon. That Rabbi Shimon says that the Kohanim, they got their general confession from the Par Achatas, from the cow. Whereas Rabbi Yehuda says no. The general confession of the Kohanim was included in the Sarah Mishtaleach with everybody else. So if we're saying over here though that the Kohen Gadol doesn't mention anything about Bnei Aharon Am Kadoshecha, so then the Gemara wants to argue that Bnei Aharon, according to this Tana, are not included in the Sarah Mishtaleach. So that is not the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda, who says that they are included in the Sarah Mishtaleach. Because if it were Rabbi Yehuda, his opinion is that Lemaise, the Kohanim are included in the Sarah Mishtaleach. Abaye hat gesagt, afilu teim Rabbi Yehuda. You can even Lemaise say it's Rabbi Yehuda. How come? You hear that? Very sharp. Abaye says, look, the Bnei Aharon are included in Amcha Yisrael, right? Because the Kohen Gadol in his confession, he talks about Amcha Yisrael, your nation Israel. That includes the Bnei Aharon. Bnei Aharon are also included in Israel. So therefore, Abaye says it could even be Rabbi Yehuda who says that the Bnei Aharon are included in the confession of the Sarah Mishtaleach. So then they transferred the goat to the fellow who was going to bring it to the cliff. So the rabbis taught when it says "Biad ish iti amid bara," so that includes even a ish, a zar, even a non-kohen, iti shei mezumon, that he's got to be prepared. He's got to be. We got to get him ready already from the day before. Iti vafilu b'Shabbos, on time, and even if it's Shabbos, you do it nonetheless. Iti vafilu b'tumah, and when it says you do it on time, no matter what, even if the fellow is tameh, is impure. Ish la'achshir sazar. So when we say a fellow to even include a zar, a non-kohen, pshita, that's obvious. Why should you need it to be a kohen? Well, since it says atonement in the context of the Sarah Mishtaleach, so I might think that atonement is generally done by kohanim, so the escort should have to be a kohen. Kamash Milan, that he doesn't. Iti vafilu b'Shabbos. We say that it has to be on time, even if it's Shabbos, do it nonetheless. So, what about Shabbos? What's wrong with escorting a goat on Shabbos? So, says Rav Sheshes, what this teaches is that even if the goat was sick, you can carry it. You can carry it even on Shabbos. Well, this sounds not like Reb Nosson. Because Reb Nosson's opinion, of course, we remember from Masechta Shabbos, is that somebody who's alive carries himself. So what should be the problem anyways with carrying this goat? Because the goat carries itself. So he's not carrying it anyways. So it must be that this is not like Reb Nosson. And therefore we have to learn a special teaching that he's allowed to carry it if the goat is sick. Afilu teim Reb Nosson chala shayni. The Gemara answers, you can even say it's Reb Nosson, but Reb Nosson's principle of Chayd Nosei Esatzmo wouldn't apply here because we're talking about if the goat is sick, So then I can only imagine the goat gets sick. I mean, it's filled up with sins. Wasn't that what the Green Mile, wasn't that like the whole Indian in the Green Mile? That fellow, where he would like suck up everyone's sins or something and he got sick or something? I don't know. It's been a long time since I read that. Anyways, so even Reb Nosson could admit that if the goat was sick, it wouldn't be covered in Chaynos Eis Atzmo, and therefore we need the pasuk to say, Iti, even if it's on Shabbos, he can carry the goat. Amrafram, Zos Omeres Erev Otzah l'Shabbos, Vein Erev Otzah l'Yom Kippurim. You hear that, Chaver? Says Rafram that this seems to be saying that the halachis of Hotzah and the halachis of Erev, although as Rashi points out, Erev isn't necessarily the Chiddush over here, but really Hotzah, is a Shabbos halacha, but not a Yom Kippur halacha. Meaning, because what we're saying is that Biad Ish Iti, even if it's Shabbos, and we're saying that even if it's Shabbos, don't worry, you could still carry it. Meaning that we wouldn't be concerned about carrying it if it wasn't Shabbos. If it wasn't Shabbos, then there's nothing to worry about. It's specifically, even if it's Shabbos, we have to be concerned about Hotzah, which would be something that we would not be concerned about on Yom Kippur in general. But if it's Shabbos and we do have to be concerned about Hotzah, nonetheless, he can still carry this goat if it's sick. So we see, Rafram wants to argue that this seems to be implying that the halachas of Hotzah generally don't apply to Yom Kippur. Only when Yom Kippur is on Shabbos we have to be concerned, and we need a special teaching to say that he's allowed to carry the goat. Iti v'afilu b'tuma l'mayuchsa. When we say iti on time, even if that means, even if the escort is tameh, he could still lamaisa do his job. So l'mayuchsa. What would exactly be what's the scenario about tuma? It means that if the fellow who's going to escort the goat becomes tameh, he could nonetheless go into the azara, and the kohen will give him the goat in the azara, even though he is tameh. Interesting. Shalu es Rabbi Eliezer. They asked Rabbi Eliezer, if the goat got sick, can the fellow carry it? So Amar Loim Yachulu La'arkiv Ani Va'atim. So all of these answers we're going to see, Rabbi Eliezer is not really, he's basically dodging the question. He's giving strange answers. And we're going to see the reason why in just a minute. So they said, what if the goat gets sick? Can the guy carry it? So Rabbi Eliezer says, what do you mean if the goat gets sick? The goat is so strong it can carry even me and you on its back. What if the escort fellow becomes sick? Can somebody else take it? Can somebody else take his job for him, and escort the goat for him? Amar Loim, he said to them, b'shalom ani va'atem. He says, don't worry, what are you asking me for? If the fellow gets sick, can somebody else do it? He says, we're not, there's no Beis Hamikdash now anyways, we're not escorting any goats now anyways, so why are you asking me? It's not up to us to do now anyways. What if the fellow pushes the goat off the cliff and lamaisa it didn't die? So does he have to go down there and finish the job? Oof. I guess another reason why maybe I'm relieved. So Rabbi Eliezer said to them, Ken yovdu kol ovecha Hashem, so shall all of the enemies of God reach their demise. Okay, I guess also not super clear what that is. We're going to see in a few minutes why he was being not answer-y. Why he was being not answer-y. Good. The Chacham where the Chacham are much more answer-y. And they say, if the goat gets sick, so the fellow just holds it on his shoulders. If the fellow himself becomes sick, so yeah, he could let somebody else escort the goat. If the fellow pushed the goat off the cliff, and unfortunately for the goat and for the fellow, the goat didn't die, so he's got to go and finish it off. That would be also interesting, because we're going to see, when did we see it? Do we see it now? Do we see it later? Did we even see it in the Mishnah that we just read? I can't even remember. But, oh no, it's the next Mishnah that we're going to read tomorrow. that the goat, it wouldn't even get halfway down the cliff before it would fall apart into lots of different pieces. All the more so that it would be very interesting if the goat didn't die, because it's already missing all sorts of pieces of its body and still alive. I mean, woo. Alright, let's go weiter. Shalosh Rabbi Eliezer, they asked Rabbi Eliezer, Ploni ma'u la'olam haba. They asked Rabbi Eliezer, a certain fellow, is he going to go to olam haba? Amle lo sha'atuni ela ploni. To which he says, oh no, ask me about a different fellow. Okay. Ma'u lahatzil roe kivsa min ha'ari. Can a shepherd save a sheep from a lion? Amr loim, Rabbi Eliezer said to him, Lo sha'atuni ela la kizba. You only asked me about the sheep? Okay. Ma'u lahatzil roe min ha'ari. Okay, what about saving the shepherd from the lion? Amr loim, Lo sha'atuni ela la roe. He said, what, you only asked me about the shepherd? Okay. Mamzer ma'u lirash. Can a mamzer, a fellow born from a union that is like not allowed? For example, if you have a married woman, sleeps with a fellow, and they have a baby, so that baby is a mamzer. So can he inherit his father? Ma'u liyabim. Does he do yibum if he has a brother who dies without any kids? Does he marry his sister-in-law? Ma'u lasud as beso. Can he apply plaster to his house, or does he have to leave part of it unplastered? Zecher lechurban. Ma'u lasud as kivro. Can we put plaster over his grave? Okay, I don't know what that's about. Lo mipnei shefliga. Okay, period. So Beseder. So Rabbi Eliezer wasn't really answering these questions. So now listen to what the Gemara says. Lo mipnei shefliga b'dvarim. He wasn't trying to necessarily intentionally avoid the questions or push them off, or maybe he didn't know the answers. No, that's not why. You hear that? Do you hear that? Rabbi Eliezer never said something that he didn't hear from his teacher, and therefore he didn't hear this from his teacher, which I assume it was Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai. And because he didn't hear it from his teacher, I didn't want to say it, even though he may have known the answers, but he didn't hear it from his Rebbe, so he didn't feel comfortable saying it. He never said anything that was not heard directly from his teacher. Oh my goodness gracious, Rabbi Eliezer, huh? Oof. Shala Isha Chachames Rabbi Eliezer, a certain very wise woman, asked Rabbi Eliezer, says this, asks this very wise woman to Rabbi Eliezer, if we take a look at Avodah Zarah, there's different ways of worshipping Avodah Zarah, and all of them are equally forbidden. Well, then how come in the Torah we see different punishments, right? Sometimes we see Magefa, sometimes we see Skila, sometimes we see Saif. Why in different contexts is it a different punishment if they're all just as Asr? Amrla in Chachma leisha ela b'palach. Whoa. Now that, whoa. Chaver. Here Rabbi Eliezer says, the only wisdom for a woman is with the, what's the word? Some kind of sewing thing. I forgot the word. Spindle? Is that a thing? Well, clearly my wisdom is not in whatever this thing is. Akoponim. Let's go weiter. And similarly, he proves it from a pasuk even. That every wise woman, she weaved. Was it weaved or spun? Spun, I think. For threads, I think. Well, okay, that's one way to push off an answer. Maybe it was like the same thing as before. Maybe just he was avoiding the questions before, so he was avoiding it here also, maybe because he didn't hear it from his Rebbe. Itmar was stated, Rav Levi chad omer zibech v'kita b'sayv gipev v'nishek b'misa sameach bilvavo ba'adrokan. Let's read that again. So we see that there's machlokas between Rav and Levi. Chad omer zibech v'kita b'sayv. If a fellow burns, sacrifices. Zibech is to slaughter. The kitar is to burn for avodah zarah. So we sword, head, combo, head on the floor, blood, chop his head off, l'maisa. Gipe v'nishek b'misa, if the fellow hugged or kissed the avodah zarah, the getchker, so then he gets Misa B'dei Shamayim. So Melech Mavovo B'Hadrokon, if he's happy for the Getchker, so then he gets Hadrokon, which I believe we said, was it Masechta Brachas, that there are 903 ways to die, and Hadrokon is, Askra was the worst. Right, so Hadrokon, I guess, is probably not pleasant either. I think it's some kind of cough or something. One who says, there's another one, which is that if there are witnesses and warnings, so then it's with the sword. Edim below Asra, if there are witnesses but no warning, b'misa, so he gets Misa B'dei Shemaim. Lo Edim below Asra, if there's no witnesses and there's no warning, but there's but he did the deed, so then B'Hadrokon, so then he dies with this thing called Hadrokon. Amr Rav Yehuda, Shivdo Shalevi lo avodas kocham. Says Rav Yehuda that the tribe of Levi did not do any avodah zarah. Shenemar, as the pasuk says, Vayamod Moshe b'shara machne v'gomer, that Moshe stood by the entrance to the camp, and he says, Mila Hashem Elai, who for the Eibishter come to me, Vayasvu Elav Kol Bnei Levi, and all of the fellows of Levi came to him. So we see that all of Levi came to him, and nobody participated in the Chet HaEgel. Yosef Ravina, v'kamelaha shmaita. So Ravina was saying this shtickle Torah from Rav Yehuda that the Shevet Levi never sinned. Eisvei b'nei Rav Papa bar Abba Ravina. And then the sons of Rav Papa bar Abba, they asked Ravina, they said, but they said, 1 second, it says was it safe in Parashat Zosa Bracha, I believe. Why not? I believe that this is by Levi in Zosa Bracha. It says, Ha'omer la'aviv le'imo lo re'isiv, that somebody who says to his father and mother, I didn't see him, meaning that when the Shevet Levi had to go and kill everybody because they were worshipping Avodah Zarah, so he was praising Levi that they were willing to not even look at their fathers. If the mission was you have to kill everybody, even if it's your father, even if it's your mother, the instructions were to kill anybody who participated in the Chet HaEgel. So it says, he'll even say, I'm not even going to see my father or my mother, meaning he didn't show any favorites when killing people for having done Avodah Zarah. So the question is, so it sounds like Shevet Levi, their parents were doing Avodah Zarah, which means that Shevet Levi Memela was doing Avodah Zarah. So the Gemara answers, no, Aviv Imo. When it says his father, it means his grandfather from his mother's side. And he was not, Mi Yisrael, who was a Israelite, not a Levi. Achiv, when it says his brother, means Achiv Me'imo, Mi Yisrael. Also means a brother from the same mother, but the father was a Yisrael, not a Levi. Banav B'nei Bito Mi Yisrael. And also his sons is referring to his grandsons, and his daughter was married to a Yisrael. So basically we can confirm that none of the Levim did Avodah Zarah themselves, and that pasuk was talking about relatives who were not Levim. Says the Gemara, that they had to make a special ramp for the fellow who would take out the goat towards the cliff, because the Bavliim were very, very energetic, and they would push him and whatever, pull his hair, to say get out of here already, just get our sins out of here. So says Rabbi Bar Chana that actually they weren't Babylonians, they were Alexandrians. But because in Eretz Yisrael they hated the Babylonians, so anything bad was the Babylonians' fault. So therefore they actually weren't Babylonians, they were Alexandrians. But the Eretz Yisrael people didn't care. Anything bad, Babylonians. So that's why it says Babylonians. Tanya Namiyachi Rabbi Yehuda Omer says Rabbi Yehuda lo Bavli mayu el Alexandria mayu. Also says Rabbi Yehuda that they weren't Babylonians, they were Alexandrians. Omer lo Rabbi Yossi tanuach daitich shenach daiti. Says Rabbi Yossi that may you have peace of mind since you have given me peace of mind. Rashi says that Rabbi Yossi's family was from Bavel, and therefore he felt uncomfortable with this Mishnah that the Babylonians were were acting like this. But once he heard from Rabbi Yehuda that no, actually they're really Alexandrians acting like this, so then Rabbi Yossi says, okay, and he was relieved. Very nice. Tov would say that they would say, get out of here. Tana, it was taught, Mashoit Sfira, why are you leaving this goat around? Dain, this goat, V'chovi Dara Sagin, when there are so many sins on this goat, just get it out of here. push it off a cliff, and let's look forward to the new year sin-free. Chevre, with that, may we look forward to the new year and the new day and the new minute sin-free. Chevre, that was Daf Samach Vav, Masechta Yoma. So at the beginning, we were resolving the shaila that we had on the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda, that on the one hand he seems to be saying that obligations from one year can carry over to the next, yet when it comes to an animal that was set aside for Yom Kippur that then got lost and then found, we have to kill it, we can't leave it to the next year. Ultimately we said, because we're concerned that was the opinion of Rava, that if you leave it around, you might end up, if you leave it waiting for next year, so then you might end up using it as a korban by accident, which is something that we do not want to happen. We then got into a new Mishnah where we talked about the Sarei Mishtaleach, that the Kohen Gadol would put his hands on the Sarei Mishtaleach and do a whole confession, then he would give it over to a fellow to take out towards the cliff and give a shtickle nudge, and it would fall off the cliff and die, that whole thing. And we said that this person can be anybody, could really be Yisrael, although it seems that the Kohanim generally reserved this for themselves. And that was like the big kind of gist of things. So that was Daf Samach Vav. Hope you enjoyed, and cheers.